DeviantArt fetishes. They're like bedbugs. For every one you know about, there's 100 you don't. And while the internet gives us unlimited access to the depths of the Coomer mind, what happens when a fetish is too freaky, even for 4chan? When does a shitpost become fetish art? And when does cringe cross the line into child endangerment? As you well know by now, if it exists, someone is into it. And in the darkest corners of DeviantArt.com lurks a man whose fetish is so inexplicable, it elicits a knee-jerk reaction in everyone who sees it. A man whose name is known to very few, but whose artwork pissed off thousands. A man who needs no introduction. This is the tragic story of the DeviantArt Big Knee guy. Today's art history lesson: knees, rage bait, and Rule 34. If you're a returning viewer, I hope you like the new look, because the old one was kind of... Let's travel back to 2015. Obama was prime minister. It would only be 1 year until it was finally the current year, and an anonymous individual going by the name BigKneeLover would set up an account on DeviantArt.com. And one look at his page reveals something very interesting. Why does an account with only 17 posts and fewer than 500 followers have 500,000 page views? Well, as it would turn out, BigKneeLover didn't just make bad fetish art, he royally pissed people off. But to understand why, we have to understand his work. BigKneeLover is a fetish artist who draws your favorite female characters with big, bouncy, swollen, distended knees. And in the grand scheme, that's hardly the weirdest thing out there. But that's not the whole story. And it all went down on May 8th of 2015, when he posted his flagship artwork, a Microsoft Paint drawing of Hatsune Miku with big, swollen knees. And less than 24 hours later, he'd kick the hornet's nest. On May 9th, he uploaded an image many of you have probably seen at least once: the biggest knees. And the comments were not only endless, but overwhelmingly negative. By November 28th, 4chan users had become aware of this little facet of DeviantArt degeneracy. And to say they didn't get it puts it mildly. Shock, horror, disgust, and in no time at all, an Encyclopedia Dramatica entry fumbling desperately to explain how such artwork could possibly exist. And though there's little evidence from the time, there was speculation among many that this was simply too bad to be real. Surely, people thought, he must be trolling. And between the comments threatening suicide and telling BigKneeLover exactly what he should do with his account, there was a really interesting debate taking place about consent. But in order to fully explore that, we have to step back and ask ourselves a very uncomfortable question. Why were people so upset by this? And what's the deal with the knee fetish? Rule 34. If it exists, there's porn of it. And in today's day and age, the rules of the internet are a fun but extremely dated signpost from a bygone era, but that doesn't make them any less true. The first known usage of Rule 34 comes from this 2003 panel from the webcomic Zoom Out, where the author expresses a very familiar dismay after finding out about Calvin and Hobbes' hentai. The reason Rule 34 caught on the way it did is because it's so obviously self-evident, so much so that 2 cornerstone adult websites are named after it. And as much as the web has changed over the last 20 years, nothing has remained so constant as people's desire to take your favorite characters and draw them doing things they should never do. But how do big knees fit into this? After all, Rule 34 largely refers to adult content of specific characters. But there are exceptions. And BigKneeLover is an interesting case because he can be explained by the much less notorious but equally true Rule 41. If it exists, it's somebody's fetish. And knowing this, let's explain how a knee fetish works. In researching this topic, it was immediately obvious that if this is real, it's incredibly rare. A cursory look through DeviantArt only produces a single-digit amount of blurry screenshots of the elbows and knees of various anime characters. And based on the tags, we're probably on the right track. The spicy My Little Pony site only has 38 entries, the Hub has none, and the one discussion site with a relevant entry actually refers back to BigKneeLover. The only solid evidence for a knee fetish is this dangerously based angel fire site, kneefetish.com, which contains 2% discussions of a knee fetish and 98% threats to kill random people. But there is some insight there. As the site reads, all you people, look around. There are many knees. Some are ugly, some are beautiful, some are hairy. Just enjoy yourself. Stop and look at the knees. But greater minds have done the work for us. According to this blog published shortly after BigKneeLover's debut, the knee fetish is actually named genuphilia, and it can best be understood as a form of partialism, which is a fetish focused on a very specific part of the body. And we can do the intellectual exercise of where these fetishes come from and what they mean all day long, but I would much rather get into why this art pissed people off as bad as it did. 2016. Shortly after 4chan users became aware of BigKneeLover's postings, his comment sections were flooded with hate. And that's not shocking given 4chan's reputation, but what feels so out of place here is how badly people reacted. After all, DeviantArt fetishes have a tendency to get way more extreme than this, to the extent that you wouldn't even know it was fetish art unless you were part of a very specific community. But BigKneeLover made 3 crucial mistakes. The first was posting anything in 2016. The second is that he committed the cardinal sin of posting fetish art that was just a little bit too fetishistic. How do we know? As with most fetish art, the combination of a recognizable character and a bizarre focus on a body part that looks strange or a situation that feels out of place is a dead giveaway. Not to mention that knees were a particularly unusual choice. And in the age of 2016 edginess and the thirst for new cringe, few sins were less forgivable than being just a little bit weirder than people wanted. And his third mistake was messing with Undertale people. Though Undertale needs no introduction, it was a very popular RPG that came out in 2015 with a very dedicated fanbase. The 2016 Undertale fandom had a horrendous reputation, descending like a flesh-eating swarm on anyone who played the game a little different than you were supposed to play the game, or portrayed a character in a way people didn't like. And while it wasn't all fans, it was enough to light the spark. March 2016, BigKneeLover uploaded the simply titled Undyne, complete with 2 bulbous knees that eclipse her lower legs. The comments exploded with vitriol, and they would continue this way for every subsequent post until BigKneeLover left the internet for good 5 years later. And we'll get back to that shortly. On the one hand, BigKneeLover's style was becoming super dated, reminiscent of the otaku craze that swept DeviantArt in the 2000s. By the mid to late 2010s, the hyper-stylized anime look had totally gone out of fashion. Fan art itself took on a much more sleek and streamlined character, and it was considered pretty passé to flaunt the fact that your art had been made in Microsoft Paint. On the other hand, the knee fetish was safe for work, but just weird enough to be able to send to your normie friend and say, hey, look at this crazy thing I saw on the internet. And on the other hand, to return way back to this debate about consent, there was actually something pretty interesting happening in the comments. Because shit flinging aside, ask yourself this: when is it okay to post fetish art? Now, the answer may seem straightforward. It's okay when everyone in the room is okay with it. But what happens when not everyone knows that they're looking at it? Is it actually ethical to make someone participate in your fetish, even if they don't know? And that's the larger issue with DeviantArt fetishes and with BigKneeLover, because supernatural ability of his to piss off the angriest fandoms aside, even if his work was satire, it was pointing at an actual issue. DeviantArt, like every website, has terms of service, and though fetish art thrives there are rules against posting extremely explicit content, and this creates a very unusual environment in which obscure, non-sexual fetish art can flourish. Think about how often you've come across inflation, or giant women, or a man transforming into a diaper. While it may be funny removed from its original context, things change when you fully appreciate the fact that it was probably drawn one-handed. Not to mention that certain fetish artists get their jollies by making what looks like innocuous artwork, understood by people who are into it, and making unwilling participants of a fetish those who don't know what it is. And on a more serious note, what happens when you put a child's cartoon character in a fetish situation? One of the more serious issues facing YouTube at the moment is the sheer availability of freaky content aimed at children. What to a kid might be a funny cartoon about Sonic pooping in a diaper should be alarming to anyone who can see the bigger picture. And while it's extremely unlikely that a given child stumbled upon BigKneeLover's work, it does bring up the much more uncomfortable question of what it means to consent to seeing something online. Because how do you police adult content when you can barely even describe what makes it adult? And while it would be super illuminating to hear from the artist himself, it seems that the hate got to him. Between endless waves of hurtful comments and mocking Reddit posts, BigKneeLover would quietly make his exit from the internet forever on July 7th of 2021. Although in the description of his final piece he cites forgetting about DeviantArt as the reason for his spare uploads, it's much more likely that he was effectively bullied off the platform. BigKneeLover, satire or not, occupied a very uncomfortable niche between the fetish world and the normal internet. But straddling those two extremes proved impossible, and that was the last time anyone had ever heard of him. So what became of his legacy? If BigKneeLover continues to upload under an alias, nobody's found him. And it seems that without his contributions, the knee fetish community has very little to show for itself. This guy was just out of place, at a time, posting dated 2000s style fetish art during the violent transition into the late 2010s internet. And if he is still out there, waiting, It's only a matter of time before he uploads something that will inevitably bring the internet to its knees. This has been an art history lesson.